What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing something that is definitely a first for me, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are gonna think we're crazy for doing. But today we got my buddy Brandon's 5.9 third gen mega cab here, and what we're doing is we're taking out the factory manual transmission and installing a 48RE automatic. Yes, you heard that right. We're going from the reliable, tried and true, tow master, best transmission, God's gift to the third gen or Rams in general, G56, to the troublesome automatic. Now, Brandon, I know you got your reasons for doing it. Why are we going from, this is actually a factory manual third gen mega cab, which is a custom order option, right? They don't.
Yep.
This is the one, too, guys. If you guys remember, this is the one we did the full built 5.9 engine on. He just put in new DDP 30% injectors. He just did a new CP3. So this thing's running real healthy. We're gonna do a compound setup in the future. Like I said, guys, I do got to do a full walk around on this truck, but you know, this is by far my second favorite third gen mega cab. But anyway, why are we taking this beautiful truck and getting rid of the manual transmission?
Well, having two daily cars that are both manual, and you know, manuals are fun. I thought I'd never swap to an automatic from a manual, but I'm ready to make some more power, go a little faster, and that way the wife can drive it. You know, she wants to party too.
That makes sense. Yeah, definitely. The manuals, you know, not everybody can drive a manual. Say what you want, it is what it is. And especially the wife, it helps to have the truck usable for more than just one person. You know, he also owns a shop, so sometimes employees need to drive it, I'm sure. You know, it just makes it easier. You don't have to worry about the transmission as much. So yeah, and like he said, he wants to go faster, and no matter what, an auto will always be faster than a manual. Now, he's not downgrading transmissions. This is a 48RE. This is the one that was originally for my tow mega build, and it's quite the unit. I'll go over it in a little bit, but right now we're already digging into the swap. Brandon right now, he's just clearing out some space. He used the factory shifter hole on the firewall for wiring, so we got to remove that, move it around, take out the master cylinder for the clutch, and do some other stuff. Luckily, before this, he already did some of the preliminary swap part. He added a Mishimoto transmission cooler. As you guys know, huge fan of Mishimoto around here. This transmission cooler is a unit. Definitely recommend for any 48, 47 setup, or really any of their trans coolers are top notch. He's also running the full send diesel braided AN fitting lines. Nice kit here. And luckily, these trucks are pretty modular, so everything is provisioned to swap everything in. So like the trans cooler, the radiator had the mounts for it, so that just bolted right in. He did have to swap the column to an auto column so that he got the shifter. And as you guys can see, he went ahead and got the upgrade to the later style with the tap shift and the tow haul and everything. So yeah, overall, luckily he did some of the time consuming work. Now we just got to start. First thing we're gonna do, pull the shifter off, and then we'll get underneath and start pulling transmission. Now the last little bit of thing we're doing on the interior before we lift the truck up is we are running the shifter cable. See if I can get a view. So just grab an OEM shifter cable, and there's a the hole is already in the firewall factory. He had to move, like I said, he had to move some wiring because he was using that for his aftermarket wiring stuff, so obviously that had to move, but otherwise pretty straightforward as far as that goes. All right, and then on the other side you got the wiring. So this is the one bracket he had to install for the shift cable, and then obviously the other one for the shifter itself. And then the interlock cable for the cable is actually already on here factory. So we're gonna find out if that works from factory, or if there's something maybe we have to turn on in the computer, or worst case scenario, we'll just wire up our own. I'm sure it's just power and ground, but I guess we're gonna find out. But yeah, so far pretty straightforward. All right, now one thing we didn't talk about, obviously the manual trucks come with a different PCM with no transmission controller. So to control this, you can do two things. You can do a full manual valve body, but then again, that kind of defeats the purpose of what Brandon's trying to do with this. So the other option, you can see what we went with, is the Fire Punk anteater setup. And we went with the Pro kit that comes with the gauge. You got the throttle valve bracket to hold that open or shut, and the computer. And what's really cool about this is you can tune in 3 different tunes for the transmission. So if you want like a tow tune, race tune, or you want to, it's really dynamic in how you can control how these transmissions shift. It's going to be cool. This is my first time messing with one of these. I'm pretty stoked to kind of dig in and really learn about them. I hear great things, and I mean, if it comes from Fire Punk, you know it's going to be good stuff. So that's pretty much what we're using to control the transmission. It's pretty straightforward. You need power, ground, TPS signal, and then everything else just plugs in. So we'll get into that a little more later when we're installing it. Otherwise, of course, have to change out the flywheel to a flex plate. So we got this Valair SFI rated billet flex plate. Of course, we got our ARP hardware for it. And then the other thing we got is a pigtail for the park neutral safety switch for the truck, mainly to have reverse lights, because obviously the plug is a bit different on here. So we'll just kind of tap in and make that work. But let's go ahead and get this on the jack, and we'll talk more about the transmission. All right, so as I was saying earlier, that this build is no compromise as far as reliability. So to start with, this is our 700 HD package with a few upgrades. Basically what that gets you is a billet triple disc gear end converter, or Randy's now, that was just a gear end originally. This trans is actually the OEM original one that came out of the my Mega, and it was originally a gear end build, I guess. So it already had the gear end billet triple or input and some other upgrades as well, but we changed it up. Basically it's got all GPZ clutches throughout. We got the upgraded forward Belleville spring, we got the billet direct apply piston We're running extra clutches, of course. We have a Randy's standard valve body in here. This is the one that was originally in the Stage 4 that's in the Mega that we swapped out for the full manual valve body. And then the additional upgrades that bring it past the 700 horsepower mark is we have a Sonex billet intermediate, and we have a TCS billet fat output. Now originally this trans was for the tow Mega, like I said, and I set it up so that way I could use this as a backup in the Mega as well for an event if need be. And that's why we went with the billet intermediate and the fat output. Now I know the weak point now is going to be the standard billet input, but the reason I did that is I had already had this converter refreshed and I didn't want to have it refreshed again and changed out to the bigger stator for a fatter shaft. So for what Brandon's doing especially, his goal is no more than about 700 horse. I'm sure this will be just fine. And the good thing about doing the billet fat output is that we have the 29 spline just like the G56. So when we go to put on his T-case, we don't have to worry about changing out the input on the T-case. So should make this swap pretty straightforward. We're just gonna go ahead. I'm gonna get the flywheel or flex plate installed. Now remember guys, we're a big fan of red Loctite here. We got our little star here made up of red Loctite. Went ahead and whiz wheeled the flex plate to give it a little roughness. Same thing on the crank, just kind of cleaned it up. Hit it with some brake clean. And go ahead and install the flex plate, bolts right on. Oh. And then again with the red Loctite, put some on the threads and then on the head of the bolt. This might seem like a lot of Loctite, but it's better that it's a little harder to remove later on than it removing itself when driving. So far haven't had an issue with my truck making 1700 horse, so if it's good enough for that, it's good enough for this. And then with the old Milwaukee, we're gonna set our setting to 1. Then we'll go to 2. And then last but not least, 3. And she's done. Now you want to just make sure you're using short bursts like that. If you sit there and nugget too much, you will snap the head off. As the old dad joke goes, that's not going anywhere now. Now one thing I didn't mention is the bell housing is the same for the G56 and the 48. If you're going from a 68 to the 48, you're gonna have to change the bell housing. It'll all bolt up, but they're different thicknesses. One thing to note too, if you're swapping from a manual to an auto, is check your starter. I've seen some clutches have some sort of spacer between the starter and the housing, so just kind of be aware of that and check that. But other than that, we got the flex plate on, of course, and go ahead and get the converter stabbed. You excited, Brandon?
I'm real excited.
So make sure you always want to put a couple quarts in the converter. That way you don't start this pump off dry. So we'll go ahead and do that. Get that in and start stabbing her in. So what you've seen us measuring is this snout, while being the right tooth count, actually is a little deeper. So what happened was, when we went to put the T-case on, we were bottoming out inside the trans. Kind of hard to see. Reason being is, if you look at the 48, the output shaft sits out about 1/2 of an inch. You look at the G56, it's perfectly flush. So my plan is, I'm going to take about 1/2 an inch off of this input shaft and see if that'll fix it. So I'll get the cutoff wheel out and do my best to make a nice clean cut, and I'll even try to bevel it for the seal. So yeah, learning as we go. All right, so took about 1/2 of an inch off the snout here, and I tried to give it a little bit of a bevel. I'm no fabricator, I just used my cutoff wheel and a sanding disc, so let's find out if this is gonna work. All right, so after a little bit of a fight, we got the T-case in. When I cut the snout, I didn't cut off the full 1/2 of an inch, so we were fighting it, couldn't figure it out. My mistake. So again, you got to cut off about 1/2 of an inch off of the input of the T-case to make it work with the fat output of a 29 spline for the 48. Definitely not the economical way to go. It just, again, so happened that I already put the fat shaft in here, and with the T-case, it just made it easier rather than swapping out the output shaft. But anyway, I digress. We got the trans bolted in. Again, guys, make sure you get the trans fully seated before you start bolting in your bell housing bolts. Don't try to force it in. You will crack the case and or the rear cover. Make sure you got a little bit of movement of the converter, and make sure you can freely spin it. That'll let you know you got the converter fully seated and that you are not binding up anywhere. If you don't have that and it's tight, you will burn up the pump, you'll break the pump, you'll hurt the converter, and overall have a bad time. So now we're gonna go ahead, get the rest of the bell housing bolts on. I got the cross member going on. We just stole the one out of my Mega right now. Brandon ordered a new one to replace it, and then we'll just use the OEM cross member. And yeah, one thing I forgot to mention though is we're gonna have to send this drive shaft off to Dan's drive line here in town to have it lengthened, because the 48 is approximately 2 inches shorter. Luckily, he hasn't had a new drive shaft made for the front yet, so he's not going to be out money, because obviously he's going to have to make it 2 inches shorter, and then he'll have to lengthen that 2 inches. So anyway, trucking along. All right, while Brandon's up top side, finishing running some of the wiring and feeding the anteater wiring harness to me, I did the underneath stuff. I got this fire punk bracket for the throttle valve. Basically, we're gonna hold it, I believe in the instructions it says about 80%, so we gotta find roughly 80%, and it'll hold it at a constant pressure. But we'll get to that when we start messing with the anteater. We did find that for some reason this bracket's wrong. I have no clue where it even came from, so we're going to order a new one on Monday and take care of that as far as the shifter. We got the full send diesel cooler lines installed, and one thing I want to note is I used some liquid white thread sealer. And what you want to do is make sure, especially on this back one, you guys can see how thin it is between the back of this plate and or the back of the unit itself and the threads. And because these are tapered threads, if you over tighten it, it will split this piece here, and you'll have a fluid leak. Now Sonic does have a repair kit for that, but just save yourself the headache and just don't over tighten. Get it snug and then call it a day, and then make sure you're always using 2 wrenches, so hold this fitting tight while you're tightening down this fitting. But yeah, overall the anteater plugs right in, goes into the output speed sensor here and the main harness connector here, and then it's pretty much it down here. We did install his drive shaft just as a temporary measure, just to move it around the shop. It's actually in there pretty decent. Usually, you know, when they're too far out, because they won't catch the bushing in this tail housing, and you'll actually have play. This is actually pretty tight. We are going to send it off to get lengthened, but at least he can drive it around in the shop a little bit. So I think we're pretty much good under here. Everything plugged in, everything looking good. We'll go up top and see where Brandon's at. All right, so we chose to mount the anteater inside under the dash. He's using the old, basically where the clutch master went to run the wiring, and that's where he's gonna run all his other wiring that we had to take out to put the automatic shifter in. But yeah, so you guys can see, overall it's pretty straightforward install. I really like how simple they make it. You basically got your black, you need a ground, red, key on power, and then this is gonna connect to the throttle position sensor, one of the wires there. I'll show you guys when we get there. And then you got your screen here that we're gonna mount somewhere around here. So pretty straightforward install. We're just gonna tidy this up, get this mounted in, and we'll check back when there's more to report. Now, the final project I had to do underneath here is set up the trans range sensor. So basically, I got the wire coming from the starter, or the clutch pedal interlock that would basically show ground to the PCM to tell it to start. So I got that coming down to here, and now it's working as like a factory auto where it's going to show park and neutral. So that will ground the circuit for the PCM to say go ahead and hit the starter. And then of course these two wires are for our reverse light. So now the main thing we wanted to do is make this a seamless install, so that way it's not like a swap truck or swap vehicle where you got to be like, if anyone wants to drive it, you got to tell them all these crazy things. So again, the whole point of this swap was to make it easier to drive, and this makes it more or less OE without having to change the entire truck harness and go crazy with it. And then real quick, you can see the wire that you tapped into for the throttle position. And he said this thing's working, so let's see. Oh, wow. That's pretty neat. So you got different modes. You got, oops, sorry, throttle position. It even shows trans temp, which is pretty cool, in mile an hour. So pretty cool little system here that we'll dig into once we know a little more about it. All right, so right now we got Brandon underneath running the shifter, because if you guys remember, our shifter cable bracket's wrong. So right now we don't have this yet. But anyway, he's got it in a gear, so let's make sure our starter interrupt works. Works like a charm. Go ahead and throw her in park. Let's see if she starts. You got her in park?
Yep.
Woohoo! All right, we're back. It's Monday, and we got the truck to actually move under its own power. This morning I came in before Brandon, and I got the shifter cable bracket put on from my other mega cab, and then come to find out that the shifter cable we put in was wrong. It was for a 5-speed like gasser truck, so it was actually too long, so swapped it out for the correct one, and we actually were able to get it on a little bit of a test drive. You guys can see it's actually in this bay now. So far so good. We just have to tighten up the transmission cross member and then top off the fluid, and we'll be back with a test drive. All right, and then the last thing that Brandon's wrapping up, he's just borrowing the drive shaft from the old Mega, because remember his is too short, so he's gonna borrow mine, because you got to drive this truck now. You want to tell everyone why you got to drive this truck?
Well, sent the old Focus a little too hard this morning. Motor's blown, so now we're gonna daily this today.
So
120 miles round trip each day.
Not bad. So yeah, we can't wait for the drive shaft to get shortened, or lengthened like we thought. So more mega parts getting dispersed around, I guess. All right, so we're finally driving it. Full disclosure, we've already been driving it all day, but had quite the day. What do you think, Brandon?
Feels like it runs nice and smooth. Got a little indicator down there.
Yeah, these shifts are nice and firm. It's cool being able to keep an eye on everything on the anteater. Definitely a new thing to try out, but probably have to make some changes on the trans tuning. Probably bump up, lock up a little higher in the RPM range. But you happy? Do you miss having that thing there?
I do not miss the G56.
No,
Get in and drive. That's it.
Yeah. So the last thing we do have to figure out, we haven't figured out, is the shift interlock. So right now you can shift it without putting the brake pedal on. So that's something we'll eventually figure out, and then maybe down the road we'll figure out if we can do some sort of prindle without having to swap all the harness from like an auto. But we're getting on the freeway here, and then I'll get you guys the freeway pull. We're getting on the freeway, of course. It's like 4 o'clock, so we got that 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock rush hour, but we'll see if we can get a good little pull. We even got Gabriel back here. Hurt this Mustang's feelings. Definitely can't beat that. So overall, swap went pretty decent. I'm pretty happy about it, and like you've seen, he's pretty happy about it.
Oh yeah.
A few little quirks we got to work out. What do you think, Gabe?
I think overall it's nice and smooth.
So yeah, trans shifting perfect. Definitely pretty stoked about that. And yeah, overall definitely recommend this anteater from Firepunk. First time playing with it, and we're gonna kind of play around with it some more. And sorry about the bumpy road, but we're gonna play around with it some more. And if there's any news, you know, that I can share, or anything I can share with you guys, I will, of course. But yeah, pretty straightforward swap. I think we pretty much covered everything you kind of got to do. This is an easy way to make a 48 go where a manual was, without having to swap like the PCM and all kinds of harnesses and stuff like that, while still having a factory function and feel of the truck. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for the next one. If you guys could like the video, if you haven't already, subscribe. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
You have to like the video and subscribe. No options. See ya.
You can't tell them that.